Hello everyone. I'm here today to talk about a really exciting concept, which is that of the new web. So before I get started, I want to introduce myself a little bit. So my name is Fluin, and I'm head of developer relations at a company called Chainlink Labs, working on a very, very cool product in the blockchain space called Chainlink. Before working at Chainlink Labs, I was on the Angular team at Google. And so I've spent most of my career working with web developers and really trying to understand what is the web as it exists today and where is it going. And so that's some of the insights that I want to bring to everyone here today. But I want to start off with a little bit of a story. So this is my wife, Stephanie. If you're watching, hi, Stephanie. But Stephanie, when we moved out to California like 6 years ago, she decided that she wanted to become an engineer. She wanted to become a developer capable of building for the web. And so she joined something called a coding dojo, or the coding dojo, which is one of these boot camps that a lot of people have been very, very successful at in terms of building up a development skill set. But when I heard the things that she was learning, I was a little bit flabbergasted. One of the things that I saw at the top of her curriculum was Jquery, introduction to Jquery, how to use parameters, getter, setters, troubleshooting Jquery, essentials of Jquery library. And this, as someone who'd been building web applications for 20 years now, was like, that's not how we do it anymore. And I had to spend so much time trying to figure out, okay, what are the things that she's figuring out? What are the things that she's learning? And how do we translate that into modern web development? That it really, really frustrated me. And I thought maybe we can do more to help developers understand, what does the web look like? What does a modern web application look like? Because in general, jQuery is still powering a huge amount of the web. But if you're building a brand new experience, you probably don't need something like jQuery. So when she found this out, she was very upset, but I really tried to figure out, okay, where is this just general programming skills, and where is this you're learning tools that aren't actually applicable to the modern world? About 5-6 years later, I then joined this very cool company called Chainlink Labs, working on Chainlink, which is the blockchain space. And blockchain was relatively new to me. I'd been paying a lot of attention since 2011, but the way that developers talk about the web, the way that developers talk about web development within the blockchain industry is very, very different than how we talked about it on the Angular team at Google, or how you talk about the web at .NET conferences or Python conferences, all these sorts of things. They use a lot of different terminology. So one of the charts that really kind of represents this is they talk about Web 1.0, Web 2.0, and Web 3.0, where a lot of blockchain enthusiasts see the web that they are building that is backed by blockchain technologies, decentralization, those sorts of things, as the next evolution of where the web is going, which is a really exciting, really cool concept. But what I ended up seeing was that all the people that were talking about Web 3 were actually building cool new technologies, cool new ways of building applications on top of a fork. And what I mean by a fork is that over the last 5 years, if you look at just JavaScript, for example, things have gotten so much better for developers. We've got new tools that I'm going to talk a lot about. We've got new systems. We've got new processes. The web is a very different place than it was 5 years ago. But a lot of these blockchain and crypto tools came out of that space 5 years ago. And so, for example, they are not using modern bundlers. They're not using modern tools. They're not even compatible with modern capabilities that we expect from web applications. And so this idea that you can be very, very advanced, you can see yourself as building the future, but if you're not acknowledging some of the trends that are happening across web development, your applications aren't going to be as good as they could be. And so that's kind of the genesis of this talk, is how do we make sure that everyone has a bit of an understanding of what the modern web is and what this new web that we're building looks like. So the example that I gave, they were missing things like TypeScript. They didn't have compatibility with Webpack. They didn't have modern Node.js. And so in order to go through this, I'm going to go through this in 4 parts. First, I'm going to talk about what does success look like, because if you don't know the direction we're headed, it's very hard to have a meaningful conversation. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the tooling and talk through a whole bunch of tools that I see as an essential part of the modern web. Then I'm going to talk through some of the challenges. Why is this hard? Why isn't everyone just doing this? And then last, I'm going to give you just a few very simple tips to try and stay sane as you do this. So let's start off talking about the most important thing, which is success, right? What does success look like? And here I actually have to start off with an apology. So here's a photo of myself with Rob Wormald, who also used to be on the Angular team. And he and I would have a back and forth debate where I would say, hey, there's no such thing as a difference between web applications and websites. And he would say, no, websites and web applications are very, very different. And I think in 2021, and even for the last few years, I was wrong. He was absolutely right. So I have to apologize to him. He was right. Web apps and websites are not the same thing. We should be thinking about them a little bit differently. And it only took me 6 years to figure out that Rob was right. So this is a screenshot of a website that I launched for Chainlink recently called the Chainlink Documentation. This is a website. This is all static content. We care about people being able to access it quickly, being able to load it. We don't really care about our development time. We really don't care about the feature set that is loaded on the page. Everything here can be completely static, and it can, from many perspectives, look like the same sort of website that you would build in 2004, 2005 without the richness of the modern tooling. But when I look at the definition of success for the site, it needs to load instantly. Users cannot really wait ever. Right? Like waiting is death when someone's trying to do something, when you're getting in their way. You want the site to look beautiful. You want it to rank well on search engines. You want the site to be discoverable and shareable so that when someone tries to send a link to someone else, it just works regardless of what social media site they're on, regardless of what tool they're using, it should just kind of work. And this is measured in a few different ways. Measuring these sorts of things, you use tools like PageSpeed Insights, right? What is the performance of my application? What does this look like? What are the Chrome UX reports saying from actual users? Is my site fast enough? You use tools like Search Console. Is it getting the traffic? Is it crawlable? Do machines understand my site? And then lastly, analytics, right? Like, what is the behavior? What are the experiences of all my users? And how are they engaging with my content? Now let's contrast this with a web application. This is the Angular update guide. It might feel static at first, but all of the content here is being dynamically generated custom for the user. If you had to render this out as static content, there would be several thousand of these pages, right? Because you've got multiple versions you can move between, you've got different settings. And so because this is really built to take advantage of dynamic functionality, I consider it far more of a web application. And the metrics for measuring success are going to be different here as well. This has to load fast, absolutely. And there should be no waiting once loaded, but it doesn't have the same emphasis because users are going to spend a little bit of time here. They're going to be engaging with the content. They're going to be clicking around and calling different functions, those sorts of things. It really needs to look and feel beautiful. It needs to be well branded, and it needs to be delightful to use. When I click on a button, I need to have a very clear understanding of what that button is doing versus just statically consuming content from a website. The way you measure success ends up looking differently. It's not all about the crawlability. It's not all about the speed of the site. It ends up being more about, like, are your users loving the site? Are they getting out the usefulness that they want from it? Are they surveying well? Are they happy? You do care about the events and you do care about the analytics, but like things like developer productivity, am I, as being a maintainer of this site, being productive? And what sort of tech debt am I building in terms of maintaining the site? These are all metrics that matter more when you're building a web application. I do want to say maybe someday these can be one, right? Like, there's a lot of people trying to do this. You've got folks like in the React community, like Next.js, trying to build from that direction. You've got people that are trying to build from the static HTML direction towards dynamic full functionality. I, 5 years ago, thought, hey, we can build websites that are web applications and there's no distinction and it's a pure, perfect, beautiful continuum. We are not there today, right? You have to decide what you want to optimize for. But I don't think that has to be forever. I think if we build better tools, better frameworks, we can actually solve some of this problem a little bit. So let's actually talk about some of the tools that the new web kind of relies on and is built on. So I will say, this is a very scientific graph here I've got, as we move from the start of this tool section to the end of the tool section, certainty is going to go down a lot. There's a bunch of tools that I'm very, very certain are going to be the future, and then there's tools that are a little bit less certain. So TypeScript. TypeScript is huge. If you are a web developer and you are not using TypeScript today, you are absolutely missing out. TypeScript is a game changer in terms of building applications that work, deliver error-free experiences for users. If you're not using TypeScript, go start using TypeScript. I've heard from one developer once who thought, oh, I don't like TypeScript, it's not very productive, and they hadn't even tried it for a week. Every developer that tries TypeScript absolutely loves it. And with TypeScript, one of the things you have to acknowledge is that build systems are going to be here to stay, right? I used to love, a long time ago, whipping out Notepad, Notepad++, Sublime Text, all these sorts of things, and just typing pure HTML. But I was not building the best experience that I could have building with something like a build system. Build systems have a ton of different benefits, right? You get things like Typescript, where you can kind of think of JavaScript almost as the machine code layer now. You get the latest and greatest features of the web, regardless of what browsers you're shipping towards. You get testing and CI. You get support in deploying and making your application work well on a target site. And you get optimization. So like, let's write beautiful, easy to read JavaScript, easy to read HTML, easy to read CSS, and then let's optimize that and compile it and actually ship to the browser something that's optimized for browsers, not something that's optimized for me as a developer. The modern web continues to change. ES 2021 is here. It's got new features, as they always do, and it's easier than ever for us to all adopt these because these are critical. And when you look at the kind of net effect of all of the advancements in browser technology, in ECMAScript, in JavaScript, the browser is actually crazy powerful now. Like going back to that earlier example of jQuery, you don't need jQuery anymore. The native browser APIs can do almost everything that jQuery can, and it can do it easier, and it can do it with less code overhead and with delivering faster experiences. I would say also the APIs are better now, right? Like even the latest innovations around changing how we access user agent strings is getting better. It's designed for improving the user experience so we don't end up with this weird fragmented web where the web works on some devices and not others, right? We want a single web that works for everybody. And the language, right? JavaScript itself is getting better. I have this really simple litmus test, which is if you ever see var in a website, just that is Mr. Yuck. That is a huge sign of a legacy website. And even to a certain extent, whenever I see function, I question, did someone intend to actually use the function keyword here? Does that make sense in this context? Or should they just be using an arrow function? Whereas, for example, if I see arrow functions or if I see let and const, I know that this is a modern web application because let and const are better in every single way than var. Every single way, right? It is locally scoped. It is the answer. You should never type var ever, ever, ever again. And if you find a reason to type var, call me up and let me know. Send me a tweet. There's also a lot of very, very cool new tools out there that if you really fragment them and segment them by websites and web apps, you've got things like WordPress, which are still powering the majority of the internet, right? People don't realize that, but the majority of web domains, right, across websites and web applications are still powered by WordPress. But there's a lot of very cool tools. Personally, I'm a huge fan of 11t as a static site generator. There's a lot of static site generators out there. You should definitely be using a static site generator if you are building a site. And then on the dynamic web app side of the world, we have really great tools like Angular and React. And each of these tools have ecosystems that are trying to optimize and make the experience better, like Next.js, like Gatsby, all these sorts of things. But there's something that I've noticed, which is that if you're using React and you're trying to build a great static site using something like Next.js, you are still going to be shipping down too much JavaScript. You're still not optimizing for the speed of experience and for the lightness of the experience for the user. So for example, the Next.js website itself downloads 3.5 megabytes of resources, which is, it's too much, right? It is not well optimized for users. It is optimized for giving user a machine crawlable static HTML page and then dynamically loading all sorts of functionality, but you're still sending a ton of code over the wire. You're still making the browser do a lot of work. You're still making the user's device do a lot of work. This is not ideal. Micro frontends are a huge topic right now in the new web, but what I'll say is that they're actually just a possible solution to the problem of scaling web apps. Whenever I hear about people reaching for micro front ends, it is not because of a user experience that they're trying to build. It's because they've got some massive teams, massive products where they've got giant sets of functionality and their own standards and their own processes, and they're trying to mush them all together. Micro front ends is a great solution to that, but if you can design from the front, focused on your users, sometimes you don't have this problem. And there's other ways like monorepositories, really good build systems that can solve this a little bit better for you. CDNs are also huge. If you are not shipping your code on a CDN, if you're still using something like EC2 or Google Compute Engine and building up and spinning up your own server, your own Apache server, you're kind of doing it wrong. You are not living in the new web. And that's hard for me because I used to love spinning up and managing Apache servers, but that is not the sort of experience you should be delivering to your users in 2021 and beyond, right? Go find a CDN, Netlify, Firebase. There's tons of these. There's actually thousands of these. And all of them are going to do a better job at hosting your content than you are if you think about and you architect your application for the new web. Webpack is such an essential tool in the ecosystem, and there's so many great tools out there. There's Parcel, there's Rollup, all these sorts of things. None of the other tools are as good as Webpack for most use cases. I'll maybe put a little asterisk there. There are sometimes some use cases that might require something else, but for the vast majority of developers, just adopt Webpack, include it in your build system, start configuring it from day one. It really is going to save you a lot of headaches, and it's going to give you broad compatibility with the modern web ecosystem. And then the last tool that I would be remiss if I didn't mention is blockchain. So I had another talk at the Reliable Web Summit called the Immutable Web, where you can actually, instead of hosting your applications on a backend with a server and APIs and things like that, where the server could go down at any point, you can actually back a lot of your applications on the Immutable Web, right? Like you can back it on blockchains, which is kind of cool. And there's also cool ideas like, because blockchain in crypto has things like private keys and wallets baked into the entire system and into the way of thinking about the world, you could get rid of, theoretically, your login with Google, your login with Apple buttons, and go entirely with a cryptography-based identity that a user is in control of, and then you don't have to, it's actually a lot simpler to implement even than doing the OAuth to some third-party scope, right? It is browser-based, it's cryptography-based, it's private and public key encryption that is really, really good, and it's privacy and security preserving, which is kind of cool. And I'm seeing more and more web pages start to think about doing that instead of relying on these other ways of authenticating users. So let's go a little bit into the challenges, because the things that I'm talking about, the new web that we're building for, it is not as easy to build for as it used to be. So one of the biggest challenges is marketing tags. Every website or every web application you're going to be building, someone's going to be wanting to push live support and user tracking and Hotjar and all these great tools that are good for marketing and understanding user, but actually get in the way of user experience, whether you're building a website or a web application. So take a look at the things that your marketing team is trying to put into your website and make sure that is a consideration when you look at your success criteria. The other problem is just this rapid evolution of the platform, right? Like the expectations of your users are not fixed. I sometimes call this the tyranny of the user, where the users are wanting more functionality from you. You want more functionality as a developer. You want to be able to do things that you couldn't do last year. Your users keep demanding more speed, right? Like they're not going to want a slower website today than they had yesterday. You're never going to succeed that way, and so expectations are going to be sky high. The tools we use keep changing, right? Like the tools that I'm talking about now would have been different than the tools I talked about 2 years ago, and they're going to be a little bit different than the tools I'm going to talk about 2 years from now. And the web itself keeps changing, right? We've got ES 2021 as an ECMAScript standard now. What is going to come in 2024 that we need to worry about? And when I talk about the new web, one of the things that is really interesting to me is that the web that I'm talking about is actually at a different timeline for everybody. Some people have been talking about this sort of technology stack in the way of building applications since 2015. Some people are just figuring it out now. Some people aren't going to catch up for another 10 years. And so how do we help everyone kind of follow on this journey to the new web and start building the new web together? So I'm going to give you just a few final tips on how to stay sane when building for this new web that we've got. So what should you do? If you're building a site, pick your favorite static site generator and write as little JavaScript as possible, right? Really focus on the static experience that your users are going to have. Make sure your page loads instantly. Follow every single step and recommendation that Lighthouse gives you, that PageSpeed Insights gives you, and make the fastest page you can. If you're building an app, pick your favorite platform framework library, right? Find the tool that's going to make you the most productive, and then optimize for your customers, optimize for the sites that you're building or the apps that you're building. If you're worrying about staying up to date, I think that conferences like the Reliable Web Summit, like all these other amazing web and JavaScript conferences, are one of the best ways to stay up to date, right? Just watch a few talks, watch a few keynotes, figure out what's going on in the ecosystem, and figure out what you want to do about that. But I also say ask questions, right? Some of the greatest resources are the people around us. So talk to a colleague and say, hey, what technologies are you excited about this week? Hey, did you hear about XYZ? Isn't that cool? Not every innovation is going to change the world, but it can be very, very helpful to see the slow avalanche of changes that happen on the web. So what else should you do? So I think everyone here should be writing better code. So make sure you're using something like Typescript or using Typescript itself. Become stricter. So one of the things that I used to do is I would turn off all the strictness flags. So I'm like, I'm just going to write Typescript. And that's a great way to start. But over time, let's all write better code. Like turn on the strict flags, write better code, create validation, make sure that you're doing things in a provably correct way. And one of the big pieces of this is automate your qualities. And what I mean by that is if you ever make a mistake and something happens and you ship a problem to production that doesn't match the quality level you're expecting, automate it. Build that into your CI, build it into your local debugging, build it into your Git commit hooks. Automate everything so that you don't make mistakes and so that you have systems and processes making you a better developer. So just to wrap up, no matter what happens today, there's going to be a new web tomorrow, so don't worry too much about it, but definitely try your best because we really are in this together. We're trying to build great experiences for users and create productive environments for ourselves. That is going to be it for me. Thank you so much. Bye.
Hey, it's Joe Eames with ng-conf. If you like that video, be sure to click subscribe either here or here, somewhere over here. And if you're looking for something more, here's another video for you to watch here or there or somewhere.